Okay, time is 12:30, so let's begin here. Assignment number 4 is due on Friday at noon. Today we will continue talking about Beamer and maybe get to the intro to R. Are there any questions before we begin? Okay, we left off last time on page 13 of the notes. So again, Beamer is a package for LaTeX that we can use with LyX, and it provides an alternative to using PowerPoint for presentations. And so what we've been doing so far is going through this Hello World presentation, or this Hello World LyX file that I've created to give you a general idea of how to construct these presentations using LyX. So if we take a look at the actual PDF, and remember again, LyX is going to create a PDF for us, and it's the PDF itself that we actually present. And this is the first page of the corresponding PDF for our example. If you notice at the very top here, you see an outline of the main sections for this particular document. And so especially because Beamer likes to put the outline on every single slide, it doesn't really make much sense to put an outline as, let's say, your second slide that you often see in presentations. Even without that, I typically would not put an outline. But we can still put an outline if one truly desires for an outline. And the way to go about doing that, make this a little bigger. And the way to go about doing that is not too difficult. Just simply insert list/TOC and then click on the table of contents. And so whatever you've indicated as your sections and subsections will be included in your outline wherever you decide to put that outline or table of contents in your presentation. Now, there are times where, one of these, let's say, section titles is kind of long. Obviously, they're not long here, but you might have a section title that's kind of long, and especially if you use other kinds of Beamer themes, you might not have space for that entire name of that section. So if you notice here, for example, section 4, simulation study, and notice how I have it up here, just called simulations. So how do I give this shorter title? It's not too difficult. Come back into my document here. Let's say if I want to do a shorter title for proposed methodology. All I do is I come up here to insert, short title. It guesses the title that I want. Maybe instead I just want, methods. And so everything that's in that box, just edit it, and now that's my short title. And now that will appear on the outline that's on every slide versus proposed methodology. And so you can see how I did this with simulations. Let's talk about animations. So, very often in a PowerPoint presentation, you use animations, meaning you, let's say, unveil one bullet at a time so that you can have the people who are in your audience focus their attention on what you're talking about rather than maybe looking ahead and guessing what you're going to be talking about shortly. So I really like to include animations. I will tell you, though, that for statistical presentations, I would say animations don't occur a whole lot. I'm not for sure why. Maybe it's just because the speakers don't want to take the time of having to put animations in their presentation, but really it doesn't occur a lot. I always include them myself. And there are a couple different ways to do these animations. One could use what's called a pause, and one could use the general overlay environment. The pause is not necessarily desirable, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail. The reason why it's not necessarily desirable is if you can see right here, let's see, let me actually show you. So I've included a pause here. You can see this is just this dotted line. And basically I'm pausing between the first bullet and the second bullet. Now, when you get a full animation then of that entire slide, you can see what happens, that now you have this, unfortunately I don't have this in PDF Annotator, you have this extra space there. I don't like that. Instead, what I would rather see is something that looks like this. So here I have the first bullet, and then let's say I want the next two bullets to pop in, and there they come, and I don't have that extra space. This is done through the general overlay environment with Beamer. And it's really simple to do it. With LyX 2.1 and now 2.2, if you remember what I've discussed before, that LyX has tried to integrate the use of Beamer more into doing point-and-click stuff so that you don't have to, let's say, use LaTeX code. I still prefer to use LaTeX code for this. I think it's easier. And so that's why I'm going to focus on this here. I'll briefly mention how you can do more point-and-click stuff shortly. Okay. Simply, as you can kind of guess here, this is how you do the animations. And all this is simply a LaTeX code box, or an ERT. Remember the evil red text? And I come up here to Tech, I insert that box, and then I can, of course, type the LaTeX code. And basically all I'm doing is typing the LaTeX code that would actually be used in a LaTeX, straight-on LaTeX document if you were to use Beamer. And you see a less than and you see a greater than. Basically, this is how in LaTeX you indicate. So here's my less than and greater than. If you can kind of see it with my, I like to talk with my hands. That's how you tell Beamer, hey, I'm going to do some animations. And then inside those two symbols, that's where you indicate to Beamer, okay, I want this first bullet to, I want this well, if you see where my mouse is right here, I want this bullet to appear on the slide immediately. So that's why I have a 1 there. And then a dash there means 2, like how many bullets or how many animations do you want this bullet to remain? And if I don't put anything after that dash that says, okay, be there for the entire frame. So now my second bullet here says, okay, come in as a second animation and stay there for the rest. If I wanted to, I could change this to 3, and you can guess what that's going to mean. Also what I could do is I could do that as well. So nothing's going to appear there first. It's going to be a blank screen, and then that second bullet comes in, and then the first and the third bullets will come in last. Or I could do something like this, 1-2, where that first bullet's only going to appear for the first 2 animations, and then it's going to disappear. So that's a very general way to do animations, and this is how I do it. There are other ways, as I mentioned. I do not have as much experience with them, but the little bit of experience that I do have make me think I don't like them as much, so that's why I'm not focusing on them. But if you wanted to explore these on your own, you're welcome to. So if I come up here to Insert, see I have Overlay Specifications, Default Overlay Specifications and stuff. Those are the point-and-click ways that you can sort of control this. So for example, if I do Default Overlay Specifications, I can do, for example, plus, minus in there. And what that's going to mean is that this is just Beamer's way of Beamer's syntax, you could say, that every bullet is going to appear 1 at a time. So with every click, I'm going to get a new bullet. Even if I had sub-bullets, they will appear 1 at a time. Okay? Now remember how the animations work here too, just to make sure you understand that. So notice here I'm on frame 5. and I'm on slide 6 of 14. So if I come down next, I am still on frame 5, and I'm on slide 7 of 14. So the way that the animation is done is that separate pages, or what Beamer calls slides, are created for every frame. Are there any questions? Now, there's a lot of other fancy things that you can do with animations, like, you can have some text appear to be red for one set of animations, when it goes back to black, or something like that. That's described in, do I have it here? I have here section 9.2 of the Beamer User Guide. For some reason, I want to say it was actually chapter 16, but it's either chapter 9 or chapter 16 of the Beamer User Guide that you would actually download from CTAN, the Comprehensive Tech Archive Network. Okay. Number 11 here, tables of figures. You insert them just as you would normally. Cross-referencing doesn't really make sense to do cross-referencing in a presentation, and so that doesn't really, I've never been able to get it to work in Beamer. If you want to export LaTeX code from LyX when you have a Beamer presentation like this, you can do it just as normal. If you were to compile it, though, in a LaTeX editor itself, you might have to compile it twice to get everything to work out. Program listing boxes, we've talked about that before with respect to a regular LyX document. So, for example, here I have just some R code that I put it in there. And of course, again, you want the R code to be formatted in a nice way. And you just do a program listings box as you would normally with LyX. Let's see now. So page 16, number 15. Okay. Now, as I said, you give your presentation in a PDF viewer, and almost always you will want to go view. Where's that? Full screen, and then this is how you do your presentation. So I'm just clicking to go back and forth between the different slides, and so on. You can also use a space bar as well. And, when you want to point something out, what do you usually do? Well, you get out your laser pointer, if I can, and go, oh, look at that sugar value right there. That is so high. And, you might keep your laser pointer there for a while. And, if you've ever noticed, especially for unfortunately, you see this like for job interviews. Let's say if we're interviewing somebody for a new faculty member here, and somebody's giving a presentation. Usually, for those of you who are familiar with Hardin Room 49, that's where we have our normal seminars. Of course, there's, they don't know what to do because there's two screens. Like, well, do I do this one or do I do that one? I always joke maybe you need two laser pointers and go like that. But anyway, it's getting beyond what we need to discuss. But anyway, sometimes for a job interview, you'll see this. It's because the person's kind of nervous, and that's normal. It's hard to maybe keep it kind of steady there. But do you really want your people that you're interviewing with, or other people you're getting a presentation with, to know that you're kind of nervous? Well, that obviously happens. Instead, what I recommend is that all of you get a computer that you can actually write on. And simply, you use your pen as your laser pointer. So, for example, and I suppose I closed it out. Yes, I did. Let's see here. Give me a second, please. So, there's a number of different PDF viewers that you can use to write on, and I use PDF Annotator. It doesn't cost too much for students. Let me get this set up. Of course, it's not going to. Of course, I just installed a update to a new version that I purchased the other day. And of course, it's probably not going to work exactly the way I want it to. Well, I'm not going to worry about the problem that you see. If you notice here, I'm not going one slide at a time here. I'm kind of doing a continuous view. Before I downloaded this new version this morning, it was all working out. But my main point is, this very long discussion here, is that I can just simply use my pen and I can say, oh, take a look at f of y there. That's a really cool equation. And so now my pen is becoming my laser pointer. And I think that's such a more useful tool than using a laser pointer itself. So the main thing is I recommend doing something like that rather than the traditional laser pointer route. Okay, so let's talk about something called creating handouts. So by default, the presentation PDF that you get from compiling the document in LyX is going to have multiple slides for every frame when you have those animations. That's not what you want to give to, let's say, someone who say, hey, I really like your presentation. Could you email me your presentation? You don't want to send them the stuff that has the animations in it. Instead, what you rather actually send them is your presentation file that has no animations, or you can say it's fully animated, so that all the bullets for a particular frame are there for every single page of that presentation. Or maybe you could just say this fully animated frames. You want to give them fully animated frames. And Beamer's terminology, that means you want to give handouts. So the way that you can do that is you simply come up here to Document, Settings, and you go to the Document class, and you have this custom field here. This is where you can specify a variety of different options for how Beamer behaves. And if you type the word handout there, you're going to get the fully animated frames as your PDF. Now, another thing that you might want to do, this is on page 18. I'm going to show it to you from another document. Oh, where is that? Oh. It's not the biggest, but I think you can at least read it in the notes. Another thing that you often want to do is that you want to distribute to others who are interested in your presentation, not necessarily one frame per page of one frame, let's say, printed on a page per page. I'm having a hard time talking here today. You don't want to have one frame printed per page of the PDF. Rather, what you might want to have is, let's say, maybe 4 or 2 or maybe 6 frames per page. And so how can you have LyX or even LaTeX automatically print, let's say, in PowerPoint talk, 4 slides per page? Well, you can use the package called PGF Packages. And the option PGF Page Use Layout 4-on-1. Okay, makes sense. And then you have some options after it. Please note in the lecture notes, not necessarily clear because it got cut off at the end of the page. This shrink here should have shrink equal 1 millimeter. What that's going to do is shrink the slides that you have by by a little bit, it just makes everything look nicer rather than otherwise everything kind of just bleeds together. And please note that I noticed this morning when I was going through my lecture notes is that some of my LyX files might have the commas omitted for some reason. I'm not for sure why that happened. And so you do need commas between like letter paper, border shrink, and then the landscape. So just to show you what I mean, because I obviously am not explaining some of this stuff as well as I would have liked. We're going to be looking at this presentation here shortly. And let me make sure I get this turned on. Yes, I do. And I'm just going to simply compile it. And there we go. And you can see this is now, I got 4 frames per sheet of paper, you could say, or per page in the PDF. If I didn't have that shrink option, you wouldn't see this white space between the different frames. That's why I have the shrink there. Any questions? Okay. So page 18, there's many different nice resources out there. In particular, there's a nice help manual now that's available in newer versions of LyX. I wish I would have had this when I was first teaching myself how to use Beamer. Okay, so now our second main example that we're going to look at is this presentation that I gave about my research at the Eastern North American region of the International Biometric Society annual meetings in 2012, or the ENAR meetings, we like to say in statistics. And at the time, I was still using PowerPoint for everything. Then in 2013, that was the first time that I actually taught Beamer to students. So I thought a good way for me, because I was even learning on my own, a good way for me to learn it on my own is to take one of my previous PowerPoint presentations and basically turn it into a Beamer presentation. And so that's what I did here. And this will allow us to see maybe some of the finer points of using Beamer in a realistic setting rather than that Hello World example that we've already saw. And also another reason why I did this particular file too is that you can actually, if you have a lot of free time on your hands, you can actually take a look at the recording of the presentation that I made. Also, you'll notice that I think at least twice, maybe 3 times, PowerPoint died on me in the middle of my presentation. And so that gave me motivation to look for an alternative. Okay. So let me get into that file. First thing, of course, you want to do with any kind of Beamer presentation file that you are using, you need to set the document class to Beamer. And we're going to look at 2 other options that you can use with it. So that T there that you see in that custom field, T stands for top, meaning that you want all your text to be start at the top and then go down. Something that I did not mention before when we were looking at, we were just talking about things that fail. Something that I did not mention before is that notice where Beamer, for some reason by default, puts the text, the main text in every frame. It puts it in the middle. Look at that. How it just puts everything in the middle rather than normally you see this in PowerPoint, but every other presentation I normally see is that people start at the top and then we have bullets that go down. So the simple fix to that then is to use the T option there for top. And we've talked about various Beamer themes. With these themes, you can go away from the default colors. And you saw a listing, a web page that showed a whole bunch of different themes that are available. And so the theme that I chose, I didn't like the default color. I chose red. So let's actually take a look at that. Kind of already did. Too many things open. There we go. So this is what my Beamer presentation file looks like that's created from this LyX. So you can see, obviously, the theme is different from what we saw before. This is my favorite theme. It is called, if I come over here to the tech preamble, if you remember we saw this last time, how to set various themes. You can see how I tried a bunch of different themes there. And to use the one I want, /use theme, Darmstadt. That's the one I chose. This isn't used as much in statistics. You know, the previous one for Hello World, that's the one I see most often used. But the reason why I like this one is, if you see where my mouse is here, notice how the outline is given. It takes up a lot less space. If you have more space, you can put more of your main text itself. And so these are the main sections in my LyX document. The circles there represent the frames. So in my first section, motivation, I have 4 frames. Now look at how that helps people understand where you are in this presentation. So I'm going to go down one slide and look what happens to those circles and motivation. Notice it's now highlighted. It says I am in the motivation section and I am on the first frame, so that circle is filled in. Then, as you can see, as I'm animating or having these new bullets pop up, I'm still in that same frame, and then eventually I get to a new frame. So now I'm on the second frame of the 4 frames for motivation. And this is very helpful then for people to see, well, where are you in that presentation? How much more time do I need to spend here? Also, you can use this for navigation. So let me come up here to application. I'm going to click on that. It takes me to the application section. And what I want to show you here is, well, what happens if you have multiple frames within a subsection? Something that, unfortunately, I failed to mention is that each of these, as you will see in the LyX file, are different subsections. You don't see their names, but they are different subsections. Now, if I come up here to application, look what happens when I go to the next frame eventually. Now you see I'm on the second frame, but you also see 3 circles have been highlighted. Those 3 circles correspond to 3 frames within the same subsection. Perhaps that is way more information than what your audience really needs to know, but that is available to you as an organizational tool. So if I keep on going here, you can see now I'm on the second frame of that subsection, third frame, and so on. Do note that I didn't duplicate my PowerPoint presentation exactly. Like I had a big table here and I didn't want to have to retype it in. So you do see some stuff like that. Okay. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So now you can see I have section 1, motivation, subsection 1.1, individual testing. So that gave us one of those circles. I have my frame, subsection 1.2. I have a frame here too. Notice that I did not include titles for my frames. You know, some people like to have titles. I prefer not to, because again, this gave me more space to work with for the content rather than helping to describe necessarily where I'm at or so on. It's just my personal preference. I come back up here to the preamble, you're going to notice I was playing around with some options. And I recommend what you do is uncomment each option one at a time and see what happens. These options, again, allow you to control, what your presentation is going to look like. The option that I use here, use outer theme. Okay, so we've talked about what a theme is. And basically, if you see where my mouse is here, where I'm at right now, that's the outer theme. So it's the outer portion. It's not something that you are going to be directly editing yourself, typically. And I wanted to control some stuff. By default, with this particular theme, there would be a title bar right where you see my mouse is. Since I wasn't using titles, I didn't need the bar. So then, use outer theme, subsection equal false. I'm not going to put information, not necessarily the title of the slide. The subsection name would appear there. And so, I just use a particular option that would not put that extra stuff on the actual PDF. Now, how did I figure this out? Well, I went to the Beamer user guide and I read it to try to understand the various options that are going to be available. This class is not only on Beamer itself, so I'm not going to go through all these different options of what you can do. The Beamer user guide is hundreds of pages long, but it contains a lot of useful information. I'm just putting this here as a demonstration of what one can do. So at the top here, I have my usual information, the title, the authors and stuff. One little thing here is notice how I have a 1 there and I have a superscript 2 here, just a convenient way to indicate where the authors are from. Now, how did I insert that? I didn't use math, a mathematical equation. Instead, just simply insert formatting, superscript, subscript. That's how you can get that kind of stuff real fast without going into creating an equation. Let's see. Now, I might have mentioned this before. So again, here's my titles, my title frame. Very often a great way to end your presentation is basically on that title frame as well. And so if I actually go to the last circle for discussion, you'll see I have ended it with the exact same frame. What did I do? Did I retype everything? No. I use a nice little LaTeX command. Oops. Excuse me. Let me pull this stuff out of here. I don't need. I got one of those evil red text boxes again. So I inserted a text box and I did slash make title. And that says, okay, go ahead and make that title again, that title frame. Okay, so page 20. Well, figures are inserted the normal way, and you can see examples of how I did that. Let's talk about animations. So this is a screen capture from my LyX document, and this shows you a little bit more of a complex approach that I did for animation. Now, you can see how I have a main bullet, then I have a sub-bullet, and then a sub-sub-bullet. And what I decided to do was show this one first, go to the sub-bullet, show that one, and then show 3 sub-sub-bullets all together. Where's my eraser? If I did not have this, then that bullet would appear with the sub-bullet and the sub-sub-bullets all at the same time. So I just did this because it was easier when I would do the presentation to do an animation like this. So for example, in this part right here, when I'm at number 4, that bullet and the corresponding sub-bullets all appear at once. Let me find that particular slide here. In the motivation. Here we go. Okay, so this is basically what came from the screen capture, or similar to the screen capture. Now I took that screen capture in LyX 2.1.5. I'm showing you now this in LyX 2.2.0. And when I brought this into LyX this morning, and this will be unknown to you, LyX actually has to do a little bit of a conversion process, since it was a different version of LyX. And during that conversion process, it put some of these like weird characters. I don't know if you can see that up here, that little arrow that's kind of pointing to the left. It put those weird characters in there. I'm not for sure what actually those mean. If I take them out, everything works fine. But I just want to point this out to you that when you view this on your own computer, in most likely LyX 2.2.1 probably, you're going to see that there. It shouldn't affect anything. If it does, let me know, and I'll investigate it further. But I thought that was kind of odd. And I think this all has to do with, again, you know, how LyX has been updated to make Beamer easier. And I've noticed there's a lot more things that happen when you go from a 2.0 document to a 2.1 in terms of that conversion. Okay, let's talk about large equations. Now, oftentimes you will want to present a fairly large equation. I kind of have an example here. There we go. Now, if we take a look at that in the PDF itself, you can see that that equation, which kind of looks small, now it doesn't look too big there. When it's put into the presentation itself, it's actually pretty large. And, you know, the first time I typed this out, you know, of course, what you're going to do, if you notice here, I wish I had this in, let me just do this. This will solve this problem. So you can see that this equation here is actually, the stuff on the right side is so big I had to actually expand it over 3 lines. If I would have kept on typing on the same line, obviously the equation would have went off the frame. And so this is a very simple thing, but something I want to point out is that, well, how do you fix these problems? Well, I'll just make it a multi-line equation. We talked about multi-line equations last time, or maybe the previous time before that. And does anyone remember how you can take a one-line equation and make it a multi-line equation? Like, how did I, you know, go down from this line to this line? Does anyone remember the shortcut? Control Enter, exactly. There you go. So that's how I quickly did that. So, you know, make sure that that is available to you. What I've noticed, you know, with these equations, you know, some of the text could probably still be read if it was smaller. And so how could I make this smaller? This is what's described a little bit on page 26 of the notes. And simply, go there. I don't have it in this document, so I'm going to make sure I point this out. Simply what you can do is, again, go to one of those evil red text boxes. and you change the environment. You say, I want to have an environment with a different font size than what the default is. So I say /begin footnote size. You might be thinking, geez, that's going to be really small. It's a footnote. It ends up not being that small. And then say /n footnote size. And then what's going to happen is that text is going to shrink. It's still going to be readable, but it's going to be smaller. And so you would be able to fit more stuff on one line if needed. And so very often when I give a presentation, there's an equation involved, I use that technique or that previous technique, or even sometimes both at the same time. Any questions? Okay, let's see here. There we go. So sometimes in presentations, you'll want to maybe, so that you can focus your audience's attention on, let's say, one thing, especially when you have a big table, you maybe want to show them one line of the table at a time. So, for example, here's some Monte Carlo simulation results that I have here. And as I page down, you can see I'm showing one line at a time. How do you do that? Let's go to the LyX file. There we go. Again, I use an evil red text box, and I put /pause at the end of the line in the table. You also will notice here that this particular slide, let me compare it to another slide. This particular slide has so much information on it, I decided to actually remove that top red border that contained information about like the outline and stuff. And that's okay to do when needed, when you have a lot of stuff to do. Well, how is that done? Well, instead of inserting a regular frame, you do a plane frame. So notice here on this toolbar here, I have plane frame. So that's how you can do that. One thing I want to point out that I failed to mention with the last example that I noticed here. Remember when we were doing the program listing box that had the R code in it? You need to make sure, this is in the notes, I just didn't mention it out loud, but I do want to mention it out loud because it's going to be helpful for your assignment. You need to make sure you use what's called a fragile frame, rather than just a regular old frame. I don't know exactly why, but if you use a regular frame, things aren't going to work out. So you do need to put those program listing boxes in fragile frames. Now let's say here that you didn't like using bullets that are those circles there. Maybe you wanted to use squares instead. Can you change it? Yes, you can. And how do you change it? Well, again, that's where that Beamer user guide is going to come in very handy, because what you need to do is go into your preamble, and you can, for example, use the command /use inner theme. So now inner theme meaning you're inside the main part of the text document, and you can put in, oh, I want to use rectangles instead of circles. And that's how you can change the bullets. Okay. I think that concludes in this particular example. You know, just like with the SAS code, or in the SAS section of this course, you know, I expect you to go through all these LyX documents that I have and make sure you understand how certain elements of it lead to a particular part of the PDF. You are responsible for that. Okay. So the third, and this is a small example, but it's going to be an important one for your assignment, is that, do I have that up? No, I don't. This is on page 24. So for those of you who are stat majors and attended the first seminar for the Department of Statistics this semester, you might remember that all the faculty gave like a 3-minute talk about their research area. This next example is my Introduction to Research presentation that I gave. It's a very short file, just 5 slides. I'm sorry, 5 frames. It's so hard not to call them slides. And where the knitr example shows basically a nice structure for a medium in length presentation. That was actually for a 30-minute presentation I gave. This was for a 3 to 4 minute presentation I gave, and it helps set up what you can do for something that's very short like that. And for problem number 4 of the assignment, I want you to basically take this as your template for the 4-frame presentation that you are putting together. So let's just briefly talk about this here. So one thing that you'll notice is I'm using the exact same theme that I did for that knitr presentation, but notice I do not have any kind of outline up here. I only have 5 frames. I don't think it was very important for the people in the audience to know that, yes, I'm in this section, this section, this section, and so on. So I just use this more as a decorative tool up there. I'm sure all of you at that time who were attending were like, ooh, that's so pretty. But it was meant to be a decorative tool. Well, how did I do that? Document settings. Let's see here. Here we go. So this little command that I found from the Beamer user guide basically removed that navigation structure that would normally be present there. Let's see. Now, one thing that I find extremely useful that I often include on my presentations is what's in the lower right-hand corner there. I'm on frame 2 of 5. Then if I go down 1, 3 of 5, 4 of 5, and so on. It's so useful to your audience members to know where you are at. How do you do that? Again, this is where going to that Beamer user guide is helpful, and it's simply this little command right there. So notice it says, set Beamer template, foot line, okay, like your footer of a page, and put the frame number. It's code. And fortunately it makes some sense, although it's not necessarily totally obvious. So anyway, so that's my presentation here. Notice if you don't want a date actually printed, you can again use an evil red text box and do /date. I think that was all I needed to say about that. Yep. Okay, so page 25 of the notes. I have just some general comments that you might find useful. Let's see, the one that I wanted to talk about was this one right there. Okay. Sometimes when you are showing a multi-line equation, you want to do one line at a time. For example, maybe you're doing you're showing the proof for a confidence interval for a population mean, and you need to show certain things one line at a time when you have a multi-line equation. Well, how can you do that? This is just a screen capture. In the actual equation itself, just simply type /on-slide, and notice the syntax that I use here, that the less than and the greater than, 2-, meaning for the second animation to the end, show this line of the equation. Then for the third line, I again use /on-slide. The key is /on-slide. There are a number of different LaTeX or Beamer commands, I should say, that are available for animations. And it just so happens you can actually type those commands into an equation box for LyX, and you'll get the desired result. So appear on slide, 2 animations to the end. Appear on slide, 3 animations to the end. And so that's how I did that. Okay, are there any questions? Yes?
So that's not in a LaTeX code.
It's not, yeah, the key is it's not a LaTeX code box. And you know, I find that kind of interesting. You would expect it might be, but I think the way that LyX is treating the math box essentially as a LaTeX code, it just displays it to you in symbols. But remember how we can type /alpha to get the alpha symbol. And so that's why I think, essentially you are in a LaTeX code box, even if you don't know that. I mean, it's interesting just in terms of like software development of, how can we, translate, let's say, something that's code-based to a point-and-click user-friendly base. And LyX does a good job. It's not perfect. But you often have to get used to these, little maybe weirder aspects so you can take full advantage of it. And this then goes back to my discussion of how in LyX 2.1 and 2.2, they try to make it easier to use Beamer so that you don't have to use LaTeX code so much. I don't think that they've quite achieved it. For example, and I'll be real brief here, one thing that I don't like is that depending upon where you are in your document, you may or may not have some stuff that actually appear in these drop-down menus. And in a typical software package, I guess maybe I'm just not remembering right, but I typically don't see that happening. Whatever's in your drop-down menu, if it's called Insert, you're going to have exactly the same options, no matter what. Here, the options will actually change. Same thing with the Edit. This has all occurred with the newer versions of LyX, and that's what's caused me frustration. Any other questions? Okay, then I think we are done for today.